Welcome, foolish mortals, to Count Gauntly's Horrors from the Public Domain. I am your host, Count Simon Gauntly, and each episode I'll be leading you on a journey through the history of film. Specifically, we'll be exploring that eldritch abyss known as the public domain. These are films forgotten by time or abandoned by their creators. The strange, the horrifying, the poorly and cheaply produced. All of these are the purviews of the public domain. So what are we waiting for? Come, join me in my crypt. It's bigger on the inside. Come, join me.
There lived a man so long ago, Count Gauntly was his name. His horror host abilities had brought him wide acclaim. The people flocked from miles around each Gauntly movie night, not knowing that the films he showed infringed on copyright. Upon discovering this fact and learning it was true, an angry mob of lawyers formed with pitchforks, torches too. They tracked the Count and sought to stop his movie hosting ways, and torches blazing put an end to Gauntly's earthly days. But our man was too resilient to let death be the last word. He sat up upon his slab and vowed he must be heard. So he stocked his tomb with gadgets from the local studio, intent on showing movies on an awesome TV show. But he had to find a legal way, so Gauntly racked his brain. 'Twas then he learned of something called the public domain. Now here he is, the time has come, his dreams are coming true. Count Gauntly's here to share a film in hopes that you won't sue.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Count Gauntly's Horrors from the Public Domain. It's been a little while since we've seen each other because I met my end. I thought I moved on, but then was pulled back into the action by the Gauntly fan club. I still languished for a couple months, sort of in limbo, but I've put my pieces back together, and I'm here. It's back to school time, and so me and my esteemed colleagues here have put a little something educational together for you here tonight with a reunion of our video correspondence college from last September. So, you excited to learn, guys, Blizzard Wizard?
Certainly.
And Thelonious, how are you feeling?
Oh, I couldn't be any more excited. If there's one thing that I love being, besides being a leader and inspiring the people, it's being a teacher and seeing young minds grow.
Because there's definitely some people who can stand to learn things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe everybody. And that's what we intend to do. Teach everybody a little something, and just kind of broaden your horizons, elucidate some things, and put you in the know. So, here goes. Video Correspondence College, Chapter 2. Engage.
I know weather is in the sky, and Gauntly asked me to be teaching today, so I figured I wouldn't talk about the weather because I've covered that plenty, but what else is in the sky is things that fly. And some of the things that fly are planes and birds. We've got several birds here today, but I'll wait on the planes because the flight that involves planes came along later. First there were birds.
Whoa.
And so the birds that you typically think of as flying are not penguins. They're things like ravens and vultures and maybe robins and eagles and things. And they've been flying as long as they've been around, since the beginning of evolution. But then there are also birds like penguins that people do not typically think of as flying, but if they wind up in a situation that requires that they can, if they're being chased by a whale or seal, for example, and their life depends on it, they can fly. But what is problematic is if whales and seals are in a situation where they need to fly, they also have fins so they can fly and chase the penguin.
It's a dastardly world out there.
But, so those were the things that flew initially, but then people came along and they adapted the wings on these birds into machine, and they developed planes. So the Orville brothers, the Marx Wright brothers, they started to fly. They developed this machine which would permit them to fly, and in the 1900s in Kitty Hawk, Carolina, they flew.
That was just inspirational.
Thank you.
I feel like I learned a lot.
I honestly wish I could fly right now. I'm so jealous.
It would be very freeing to just shuffle off this coil and take flight.
Exactly. We don't have any props to symbolize the final stage of flight, but after humans developed airplane flight, they developed space flight. And you know what rockets are, Jimmy? Rockets are flying things.
And that's all that needs to be said right there. But if any of you out there are curious about getting to know just a little bit more about flying and flying things and things in the sky, well, we've got a little something for you right here.
So we've covered birds fly, planes fly, rockets fly, dragons fly, flies fly, dragonflies fly, other insects fly, fish fly, fish fry, fish die. It's pretty inspiring. There's a lot of things that fly.
Yeah. I've certainly learned a lot. I mean, you just look like you're brimming over with inspiration.
I'm thoroughly inspired. I can't handle it.
Whoa! He's taken off. He's taken flight.
My word.
He's gone.
You know, honestly, hearing him talk about flight really makes me think about other modern marvels of mankind. And, you know, I think it's time that people start learning a little bit about the wonders of the whisk. Now, it's kind of interesting. The history of the whisk goes...
Whoa, who's this?
Hey, yeah, you said I was gonna do the thing where I talk and tell the people about stuff, right?
Yeah?
Yeah, I've got
Oh,
it.
come on, before you
I've got a thing
But
to
I was-
say
I-
to the people. So I'm here to tell you today about home brewing.
Sounds like we've got a surprise in store, Thelonious.
Yeah,
I guess.
let me
Quite the surprise.
let me tell you, home brewing. It's some fantastic stuff. Yeah, thank you. And there's a lot you can do with home brewing. People have been home brewing for centuries, since the Middle Ages, making their own beer at home. And so can you.
And for those of you at home, bear in mind that station regulations state that alcohol is allowed on programs when it is required for the production of the program.
Exactly.
Ergo, for educational purposes, on the topic of homebrewing, it's A-OK.
So what you want to do first is you get yourself a pot, usually a little bigger than this, but this will do. You pour a bunch of water in there. You get your grains, your barley, your mash, whatever. Put it in a bag. Boil it for a few hours or so, whatever. And then at the end of it, you're gonna have wort. And you take your wort, which is like a sweet, unfermented beer, and you're gonna filter it out into your fermenting bucket. When you got your fermenting bucket, you want to shake that around, mix in some yeast, and let it sit 1-2 weeks, and you get yourself some alcoholic beer. Then, at the end of that, you want to filter that again, pour it in your bottles, fill the bottles with sugar, and that'll carbonate it. You let it sit for another week. And by the time you're done, you got one delicious beverage. And it really is fantastic. And you can have a little beer, or you can have a lot of beer. It's all beer. It's all good. But let me tell you about something
You
other
know,
than beer.
all things considered, projectionist / Santa Claus,
Yeah.
I think I legitimately learned something in that segment, so the Correspondence College is doing its work, I think.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Now, let me tell you about something the government doesn't want you to know about, because it's also possible to distill liquor in your own home, too. And the federal
I think
government
that
says
is the limit of the time that we have for this segment.
all right, next time,
Thank
next
you.
time.
But, you know, the time may come when the production of a program requires that. But time will tell. See me behind the station. Or don't. Or do. For those interested in the production of tasty beverages of all shapes and sizes, provided there is something out there to be found, I have found it now, and here it is, presented for your viewing pleasure while you consume whatever potent potables you have on hand. Enjoy.
pure, refreshing. A beverage as old as history. The ancient Babylonians were probably the first to brew beer. The Egyptians, too, brewed a beverage from fermented barley. It was a beer reserved for the great feasts of the day. The Roman conquest of Egypt introduced the beer to the Western civilization of the day, as Caesar and his warriors drank toasts to their victories. The Anglo-Saxon monks are credited with the development of many brewing formulas. The improved brews were well established as fine beverages, high in food value, by the time the Pilgrims set out for America. Later, taverns and inns became the meeting places of men who helped make American history as they enjoyed their favorite brews. Yes, the fine beer and ale we enjoy today are beverages with a heritage which is unequaled, yet they are as modern as today. In today's brewery laboratories, knowledge passed down through the centuries is combined with modern chemistry of food to produce beverages that would have been the envy of the kings and emperors of old. From the laboratory to the tanks where the finest of American malted grains are fermented, the beer of today is brewed under spotlessly clean conditions. Modern scientific instruments control the entire brewing process. No other food products get more careful attention in manufacture than American beer and ale. In addition, the brewing of this fine beer and ale today is one of America's great industries, contributing much to our economy. Some 400 modern breweries in operation today represent an investment of more than $2 billion in buildings and equipment. To staff these breweries requires nearly 100,000 employees, earning $350 million a year. American farms supply most of the ingredients required for brewing: barley, wheat, corn, rice, hops, and soybeans, thousands of tons of it. To be more specific, every year the farmers of America sell the breweries more than 1 billion pounds of farm products worth $250 million. From these fine golden grains, the breweries produce over 1 billion gallons of immaculately pure beer and ale in barrels, cans, and bottles to suit every taste, occasion, and personal preference. Beverages high in food value and rich in tradition, ready to add to gracious living the American way. About 1/4 of the spent grain goes back to the farms as cattle feed. Because of the high concentration of protein and fat, the spent grains are of special value in increasing milk production. In addition, the excess brewer's yeast is one of the richest sources of vitamin B complex. Much of it is used in preparation of vitamin extracts for medicinal purposes. These byproducts are, of course, untaxed. But the beer and ale itself are subjected to heavy direct federal and state excise taxes. Taxes which help pay the cost of fine schools, modern highways for our pleasure and communication, and operation of our government. Taxes on beer and ale provide $850 million a year to state and federal governments. This is in addition to the property and income taxes paid by the brewers, beer distributors, retailer, and their respective employees. The brewing industry is proud of its contributions to America in fine malt beverages, employment, raw material purchases, byproducts, and taxes. And so are the people who form the link between the brewers and the consuming public. As the connecting link, the men and women who distribute, sell, and serve malt beverages have a two-way responsibility. To the brewers, they are responsible for the protection of the quality of the beer and ale they handle. To the American public, the sellers and servers of beer have an even greater responsibility. And that's because, to the public, they are the brewing industry. They are good American citizens who take their responsibilities seriously. The distributors, for example, they know the importance of cleanliness. They make every effort to keep their storage buildings and delivery trucks spotless. Their drivers know the importance of friendliness, courtesy, and observance of traffic regulations. Grocers and takeout store operators, too, realize the importance of cleanliness, observance of the law, and service to the public. They know, for example, that the public expects them to stock beer and ale in the various sizes of bottles and cans available, as well as in a choice of brands. And as good American citizens, they know and obey the laws and regulations pertaining to the sale of beer, as well as all other laws governing their business. But the enjoyment of beer by Americans is not limited to family and neighborhood gatherings. Inns and taverns are part of American history. Today's taverns, though much more modern, strive to live up to the reputation established by the famous places of the past. Friendliness is still the aim, whether it be a sophisticated lounge, a small place in the industrial section of town, or the average tavern in the average neighborhood. The neighborhood tavern is a friendly meeting place for the community, the average citizen's club. Its owner, he's just another good American. He knows that he and his operation reflect on the whole brewing industry. He wants to keep that reflection a good one. And that's why he practices the 5 tested principles of good tavern operation. First of all, he protects the quality of the beer and ale he sells by serving it at the right temperature, whether it be in bottles or on draft. Second, he knows that he's serving beverages which are made under immaculate conditions. He believes they should be served in clean glasses and in clean surroundings. What's more, he knows that a tavern should be a friendly place where people can relax, discuss issues of the day, and enjoy sparkling malt beverages. People who come into his place are his guests. You might call that hospitality, something people expect in a tavern. That's especially important when it comes to serving members of the armed forces, whether they be from a nearby post, just passing through, or residents of the community on leave. The tavern operator knows he and the community have a responsibility to servicemen and women. He works with armed forces officials in all matters which might involve his operation so far as servicemen and women are concerned. And that brings us to the next principle of good tavern operation: observance of the laws. A good operator knows that laws are designed to help preserve the rights of everyone. He makes every effort to observe them and cooperates fully with all law enforcement agencies. Being a good citizen is the 5th principle of good tavern operation. He knows the public expects him and other businessmen to take an active part in all worthy local activities. He knows he must also serve on committees and support activities like the Community Chest, March of Dimes, Cancer Fund, Chamber of Commerce, and similar organizations. Yes, quality of product, cleanliness, friendliness, observance of the law, and good citizenship. These are the principles. There are some who look for any opportunity to magnify every mistake and use it to seek prohibition of the malt beverages, which add to the enjoyment of gracious living. However, more than 1 million Americans are a part of this great industry. As long as they and the millions more Americans whom they serve continue to live up to the fine heritage of beer and brewing, we can continue to enjoy gracious living with the help of fine beer and ale. Gracious living, self-government, freedom, tied to the way of doing things that have made the American economy what it is today and have helped make America great. That's the way we, as Americans, like it.
I thought that was a pretty good film. You know? Well, how do you guys feel about that?
I mean, I would have liked it if it didn't interrupt me, but I mean, that's neither here nor there. It was certainly educational.
That's all we can ask for. What about you, projectionist?
I thought it was pretty interesting. I was still mad he took his seat back from me.
Well, you know, if it sits, it fits. That's really what you got to take away from this lesson. But
So-
now I think the time has come, Thelonious, that you can share what you have to share
Thank you.
with the people at home.
So, as I was saying before, if you're going to be talking about modern marvels of mankind, I think you can't really go through history without talking about the whisk. I mean, when you think about it, what would you say was the oldest whisk of mankind?
The bronze whisk.
See, trick question. The oldest whisks? Right here. And I'm not talking about my hands, I'm talking about everyone's hands. You go back to ancient times when they needed to stir any sort of device and bring air into it as part of their recipe. They would just use their hands, whisk it around, and they would be able to get the mixture that they would want. Now, when you're talking about bronze whisks and things like that, well, that would come to be around 19th century or so. The Victorians, they were crazy in love with their devices, and one of them, of course, was naturally the whisk. So that's about the time that they got really interested in all the different ways that it could be used. So they had whisk for sauces, they had whisk for their baking, they had whisk of very different sizes. Not too many people know that depending on how much air that you want to have in the whisk, you control that by the number of metal strands that you have in there. The more strands that you have, the more air that you're able to churn as you are putting it through the batter itself. So it's actually a very complicated process, but that is a story for another day. Don't get me started.
Well, there's Whisk 101 and then there's advanced Whisk studies. So.
Oh yes, and I've been through all 314 levels of whisk school, so better start studying now if that's what you want to do.
That's why you got to keep sending in for those Correspondence Video College VHS tapes that we send to your mailbox.
Absolutely. Now, when you talk about modern whisks, it really didn't become a household tool until about 1963. That is the start of the career of a Miss Julia Child. Oh, she truly was the queen of whisks, let me tell you. And it was thanks to her work that she introduced the entire country into the multiple uses for whisks. They could be used for setting up creams, they could be used for making egg whites. I'm sure a lot of people at home really love their egg whites. I know I do. They could be used for omelets. They could be used pretty much on any food. There's no reason why you may not want to whisk it. I mean, one way or another, I think life is just made better when you whisk in a little bit of fun. You know what I'm saying?
I think we can all identify with that. How do you feel about whisks, projectionist?
Oh, whisks are awesome. I use a whisk now and then to make some beer, so whisks are great.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing your whiskey business with us.
You know me, I love being a whiskey devil. Whiskey devil! Okay, I'll stop.
I like whiskey.
So say we all. So, for those in the know now about whisks and culinary advancements throughout the ages, now that you've been so thoroughly enlightened, you will be able all the more to appreciate our next entry in tonight's bill of fare. Enjoy.
Yes, sir, wedding bells finally rang in the life of Margie Blake. Back from their honeymoon, she and Tim are headed for a life of wedded bliss, they think. Yes, the honeymoon is over for Tim now that he starts back to work. And it's over for Margie, too,
as she enters her bright new kitchen to cook her first meal. Can she prepare those favorite dishes of Tim's just like his mother used to make? What would he like for dinner? He just loves chocolate cake. Go ahead, try one. All you have to do is follow the recipe. This is going to be easy. Let's see, what's next? It says, cream butter until soft and smooth. Cream the butter? Better get the cream. That's right, pour it in. The recipe says cream the butter, so put in lots of cream. Just look at that silky smooth texture of that batter. Will Tim be surprised? Will Tim be surprised? No, Margie, your cake didn't turn out so well because you misunderstood a term in your cookbook. You'll find that your cookbook contains many terms which pertain to cooking alone. It is necessary for you to know what these terms mean before you can interpret recipes properly. To cream butter merely means to work it with an instrument until it becomes soft and smooth. There are many other terms you should know. For example, you must stir the ingredients in your chocolate cake. To stir is to mix food materials with a circular motion to secure a uniform consistency. Later, you may be required to beat egg whites stiff but not dry, or so that they hold the greatest amount of air without losing their elasticity. You may have to fold two substances together. The process of folding combines two motions, cutting vertically through the mixture and turning over repeatedly by sliding the instrument along the bottom of the bowl. The purpose of this motion is to prevent loss of air from the ingredients. In making a frosting for that same cake, you may boil a sugar syrup. To boil is to cook at such a temperature that bubbles rise continuously and break on the surface. Later, your frosting recipe may call upon you to perform the test for the soft ball stage. And this is performed by adding a few drops of the substance to very cold water. If the drops form soft balls that can easily be flattened with the fingers, the material is at the soft ball stage, or a temperature of 235 degrees Fahrenheit. The frosting may have to be beaten. This may be done with an electric mixer. To beat by hand is to make a mixture smooth, or to introduce air by using a brisk, regular motion that lifts the mixture over and over. The making of this cake and the frosting on it involve the terms cream, stir, fold, boil, soft ball stage, and beat. Almost all bread and roll recipes call for kneading the dough. To knead means to manipulate with a pressing motion, accompanied by folding and stretching. In cooking meats, other terms are used. Less tender cuts of meat may best be cooked by stewing. When applied to meats, this means to add a small amount of water and simmer until tender. To simmer is to cook in water just below the boiling point, or at a temperature of approximately 185 to 195 degrees Fahrenheit. Other cuts of meat might be cooked by braising. First, the meat must be dredged. To dredge simply means to coat with flour, cornmeal, or other fine substance. Your recipe will usually tell you what should be used. Next, you must brown the meat. This is done by cooking in a small amount of fat until brown. Be sure to brown the meat on both sides. The third step in braising is to add water and cook by simmering. So you see that the term braise includes three other terms: dredge, brown, and simmer. Of course, braising is only one of the many, many ways in which we can cook meats. One of the most popular is roasting. The terms roast and bake mean the same thing: to cook by dry heat. But before you actually start to roast the meat, you may sear it. This is done by the short application of intense heat. And causes the surface of the meat to turn brown in color. It is done to improve the flavor and appearance, but does cause greater loss of juice. The oven temperature should then be reduced to proceed with the roasting. Suppose Margie's cookbook told her to marinate the vegetables before preparing the salad. Would she know what to do? To marinate means simply to saturate the food with a marinade. A marinade is an oil-acid mixture, which is usually a kind of salad dressing. The mixture is usually allowed to stand in the refrigerator for some time. Sometime during your career as a cook, you'll decide to serve scalloped cauliflower. This involves even more terms. A white sauce should be made first, and the first step is to scald the milk, or to heat it to a temperature just below the boiling point. While the milk is heating, add flour to melted fat in amounts called for by your recipe. Stir rapidly to prevent the formation of lumps. Scalding is complete when a scum forms on the surface of the milk. Add the milk slowly, again stirring constantly to avoid lumps. Notice the scum, which indicates the milk has been scalded. Meanwhile, the cauliflower must be boiled until tender. Put alternate layers of boiled cauliflower, grated cheese, and white sauce in a greased baking dish. A layer of breadcrumbs on top if desired. And bake in a moderate oven until brown in color. So you see, in this case, the term scallop includes the other terms: white sauce, scald, boil, and bake. One of the real tests of a cook is their jelly making, and the crucial point in making jelly of any kind is in knowing when it is cooked. A jelly test indicating a temperature of 220 degrees Fahrenheit is frequently used. One of the satisfactory jelly tests is the sheep from a spoon test. This is performed by allowing a small amount of the juice to drop off a spoon. When the last two drops run together and sheet from the spoon, the jellying stage is reached. The jelly should be removed from the fire at once. These are only a few of the terms you will have to use and understand. How can you learn the others? Well, most good cookbooks have a glossary of terms in the appendix. Let's see if Margie's cookbook has one. Yes, even Margie's cookbook has a glossary. Cream. To soften a fat with a spoon or bigger, you also to combine the softened fat with sugar. If she had only looked at this before she baked that cake. But wait a minute. There's still time to bake another cake before Tim comes home to lunch. It'll be right this time, and he'll never know the difference. Yes, even Margie found that she could learn to cook when she discovered the significance of the terms used in cooking. And Tim will never know she ruined her first cake.
was some beautiful whisk footage, I have to say.
Yeah.
Ready to just get in there with my manual whisks.
But be careful, don't get whisked away.
Well, before you get whisked away into the ether of whatever program follows up this broadcast, we have one final special educational lesson for you here. And well, what did you think of that last film, Projectionist?
It was great. I loved all that whisk stuff that was involved. There were whisks in there, right?
I mean, you know what they say, life involves some whisks.
Absolutely.
So are you more of a whisk taker or a whisk maker today?
I think today I'm a bit of a whisk taker. What do you have for us?
All right, so this is going to be a little challenging. Maybe it's a little crazy, but I'm a pretty, in addition to being a thoroughly well-watched individual, I like to read every once in a while, pick up a book, crack a binding. And as such, I, every once in a while, read some poetry. I'm man enough to admit it. And, you know, my lesson for today, after we heard some very valuable things, some very intellectually stimulating things about the history of flight, about the practices of home brewing, about the history and cultural practices of whisks, and a little bit of science of the whisk. Now, getting some language arts, really round out that liberal arts education. And so, what I got for you is a little insight on something called common meter, also known as ballad meter. Now, the meter is sort of the structure, the recurring structure of a poem. You know, you got your iambs and your dactyls. And it kind of has to do with how the sounds hit your ears, whether it's a ba-ba or a ba-ba. You're picking up what I'm laying down, I'm sure.
Ba ba ba.
Ba.
Ba ba.
Mm-hmm.
Ba.
Now, what's special about the common meter? It's got 8 syllables followed by 6. 8 followed by 6, 86. It's like a killer meter. And it comes up a lot in songs that tell stories. So sort of epic poem, ballads, that type of thing. But it gets used in songs every once in a while too. And you've heard it a lot even if you didn't realize it. And case in point, I was reading Ernest Thayer's classic sports poem. I'm not normally one for the sports, normally more for the poetry. But this crosses, it checks both boxes. It is Ernest Thayer's Casey at the Bat, published in 1888. And wouldn't you know it, it's got ballad meter par excellence. And so I've got a little musical rendition for you here, as best I can. I know from time to time you've shown some musical chops, Santa. And so if I stumble too much, maybe you can help me out. Maybe you too, Thelonious, if you feel the spirit move you, but I won't push you too far beyond your wheelhouse and your whisks.
I'll still do my best.
Okay, all right. So, Casey at the Bat by Ernest Thayer, presented in a tour de force of common meter. So, as best we can here. Here goes. The outlook wasn't brilliant for the Mudville 9 that day. The score stood 4-2 with but 1 inning more to play. And then when Cooney died at first and Barrows did the same, a pall-like silence fell upon the patrons of the game. Yippee-yi-yay! Yippee-yi-oh! The patrons of the game. Do-do-do-do-do. A straggling few got up to go. In deep despair the rest clung to the hope which springs eternal in the human breast. They thought if only Casey could but get a whack at that,
We'd put up even money now with Casey at the bat. But Flynn preceded Casey, as did also Jimmy Blake, and the former was a hoodoo while the latter was a cake. So upon that stricken multitude grim melancholy sat, for there seemed but little chance of Casey's getting to the bat. But Flynn let drive a single to the wonderment of all, and Blake, the much despised, tore the cover off the ball. And when the dust had lifted and men saw what had occurred, there was Jimmy safe at second and Flynn a hugging third. Then from 5,000 throats and more there rose a lusty yell. It rumbled through the valley and it rattled in the dell. It pounded on the mountain and recoiled upon the flat. For Casey, mighty Casey, was advancing to the bat. Advancing to the bat. There was ease in Casey's manner as he stepped into his place. There was pride in Casey's bearing and a smile lit Casey's face. And when responding to the cheers he lightly doffed his hat. No stranger in the crowd could doubt 'twas Casey at the bat. 10,000 eyes were on him as he rubbed his hands with dirt. 5,000 tongues applauded when he wiped them on his shirt. Then while the writhing pitcher ground the ball into his hip, defiance flashed in Casey's eye, a sneer curled Casey's lip. And now the leather-covered sphere came hurtling through the air, and Casey stood a-watching it in haughty grandeur there. Close by the sturdy batsman the ball unheeded sped. That ain't my style, said Casey, and strike one, the umpire said. From the benches
with people,
there went up a muffled roar, like the beating of the storm waves on a stern and distant shore. Kill him, kill the umpire, someone shouted on the stand, and it's likely they'd have killed him had not Casey raised his hand. With a smile of Christian charity, great Casey's visage shone. He stilled the rising tumult, and he bade the game go on. He signaled to the pitcher, and once more the spheroid flew. But Casey still ignored it, and the umpire said strike two. Oh, Casey still ignored it, and the umpire said strike two. Fraud, cried the maddened thousands, and the echo answered fraud. But one scornful look from Casey, and the audience was awed. They saw his face grow stern and cold, they saw his muscles strain. They knew that Casey wouldn't let that ball go by again. The sneer is gone from Casey's lip, his teeth are clenched in hate. Bump, 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 he pounds with cruel violence his bat upon the plate. And now the pitcher holds the ball, and now he lets it go. Bump, 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 and now the air is shattered by the force of Casey's blow. Oh, somewhere in this favored land, the sun is shining bright. Join us again, Blizzard Wizard. The band is playing somewhere, and somewhere hearts are light. And somewhere men are laughing, and somewhere children shout. But there is no joy in my mighty Casey has struck out. Thanks for joining us again for Chapter 2 of the Correspondence Video College, everybody. Hope you learned as much as we did here. Hope you enjoyed
some food and libation, and you just grew your brains a little bit to get back to school. Good to see you again, guys. Bye.
For example, if they're being I'll start. Okay. So